Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Here on Earth.
Hello and welcome or welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth, here on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. You are watching or listening again on KGRA. And should you wish to become a subscriber, just go to their website and follow the protocols. And if you use my name, PETER, as your subscription code, you will receive a full 30% off the monthly or the yearly subscription rate. And that will entitle you not just to audit every show I've done here, but every show that has ever been done on this great network. Often I do a monologue, and recently I haven't, but today necessitates one. As in life, sometimes things come right out of left field and knock you for a loop. Early today, I learned that a very dear friend and close colleague of many years had passed away early this morning. Dr. James DeMeo was the director of the Oregon Biophysical Research Laboratory in the beautiful mountains just outside of Ashland, Oregon. Jim was one of the most remarkable people I knew, and one of the world's greatest scholars on the life and work of Wilhelm Reich, and a dedicated scientist who spent much of his life replicating Reich's experiments, working from them, continuing to do weather modification with cloudbusters here and abroad. And I'd like to first read his bio as it exists if you were to visit the Oregon Biophysical Research Lab. And you know what? I clicked it off, and I'm not going to try to find it now, but he received his undergraduate degree from the University of Kansas based on studying, I believe, meteorology. And as a prerequisite for himself, he made it clear that using Reich weather modification equipment during his time as an undergraduate, he would affect the weather in that part of Kansas in the most positive way that could be corroborated and effectively within an academic structure prove the viability of a Reich cloudbuster to create rain, to inhibit drought. The laboratory is a beautiful place in this wonderful part of the state of Oregon. And I'm going to show you some photos to give you an idea of who Jim was and the work that he did and some of the time we spent together. Over the years, we met in the late 70s when we were both actively becoming involved in our profound lifelong interests in the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich. Myself, more or less a generalist, but Jim very much moving forward in the weather modification work. And he had quite a number of wonderful conferences at the Green Springs Lab in Oregon. And again, make a note here, If you want to learn more about the laboratory, it's the Orgone, Orgone, Biophysical Research Laboratory. And here's a picture of Jim and his wife Dasha out at Crater Lake, an extraordinary natural area in beautiful Oregon. This is Jim with one of our dearest friends who I was back and forth with earlier today. Luis Rey is from Spain and a very dedicated follower of Reich's work. This is a friend of ours, a doctor from Italy who came in from one of the talks, and the assistant director, now the director of the laboratory, Tom Di Ferdinando. Tom has been Jim's dedicated assistant for decades, and we all send him our love and condolences along with Dasha as he assumes this important new role. This is the main building at the research laboratory. And this is Jim some years back giving a seminar. It was a beautiful day, so we set up chairs outdoors and did it out there. This is one of the outbuildings. Some of you have heard of Orgone energy accumulators, wrongly referred to as Orgone boxes or other slang terms. They are made of layers of organic and inorganic material, which holds and reflects energy. They are in a building, which is an accumulator in itself. I've used them over the decades, and they really do work. It's the inside of one of the accumulators. And this is one of the cloudbusters on the property. I guess I should not use this as an opportunity as a lesson in orgonomy, the science that Reich created on how energy functions in the living and non-living realms. But this device that looks something like an anti-aircraft gun draws down energy from the atmosphere that may be stale and not moving, hovering over an area where it's experiencing drought, and gets the energy moving. And if you draw from the direction of water, Reich conducted experiments with this in both Maine and the state of Arizona, and broke every weather record ever established up until that time with responsible use. It functions by having these large industrial BX cable. They're empty, but they're grounded in moving water or a well, and it creates a drawing. The best example I could give you was my wonderful Russian Nana. If you'd have you were breaking out or something when you were an adolescent, she would cut a potato in half and have you hold half to your face. It was a folk remedy, but it had the same function. The natural life in the potato literally drew the toxins to the surface and helped that blemish heal earlier. This is one of many dormant volcanoes in the great state of Oregon. And here we are up about 7,000 feet near one of the greatest natural locations I have ever visited in my life. Crater Lake, which I would never have seen if it hadn't been for Jim, is the open top of a long dormant volcano with a beautiful little volcanic island in it. And the water is so blue, it seems quite unreal, especially under certain lighting conditions. Apparently because of a certain copper component in the water. You see the color there better. Jim and I spoke at quite a number of conferences around the country and around the world together. One very memorable one was the International Orgonomy Conference about 7 years ago in Rome, which was a wonderful event. And there's Jim top left, and there I am, having somehow gotten stuck in the middle, I think because of my height. Jim and Dasha in Rome. and our dear friend Luis Rey on the right from Spain, and the wonderful Francisco Zito on the left, who organized that conference brilliantly. I have to say, this is one of those conferences I would have gone and spoken at just for the food. I grew up and lived most of my life in New York City, and I thought I knew Italian food. What a humbling experience this conference was. It's just one small side dish. I just had to show it. And this is us at the conference. No, actually, this is us in Greece at a conference 5 years ago, organized by the great Jenny Sari, and Contact with Space Conference, the title taken from Wilhelm Reich's last book. You see Jim with myself and Louis, and in the left foreground there, you see Mr. Richard Dolan. And here he is with Jim and the missus. And a toasting picture there. And I guess that's the last picture of us ever taken. I will miss this extraordinary man. He was a brilliant writer and theorist, a great scientist, and wrote a number of important to brilliant books. Several of them I want to bring to your attention. The Orgone Accumulator Handbook. If you have any interest in this subject or an interest in constructing one of these devices, this is the best piece of literature published on it. In Defense of Wilhelm Reich, one of the best books about Reich. Almost all the books I've read about Reich are uninformed, skeevy, biased, dismissive, and are written by people with little or no appreciation of his accomplishments and work. This is an amazing compendium of articles and papers, the Heretic's Notebook. I believe all of these books are available from the Orgone Biophysical Research Laboratory bookstore, or with any luck on Amazon. The last one here, I have to say, Sahara Asia, a word that Jim created from Sahara and Asia, is one of the most stunning pieces of original research I have ever read in my entire life. I'd put it in the top 5 books of original research. And what do I mean by that? Jim took a number of established fields, meteorology, archaeology, anthropology, studies of human sexuality, patriarchy, child abuse, and was able to establish with great scholarship and authentic factual material, in part analyzing the condition of the remains of skeletons recovered from ancient graves, that about the time that the goddess tradition was replaced by patriarchy and monotheism, violence against women and children increased, and a repression in human sexuality in certain cultures advanced. I can't recommend it too highly. If you have any interest in any of these areas, I strongly encourage you to acquire that book. We will miss you, Jim, and I guess that's really all I have to say about it. And now, let's work to a positive note and allow me to bring on my guest for this evening. My dear friend, Patrick Colligan, was born in Buffalo, New York, and entered into active duty in the United States Air Force in December of 1976. He served as a sergeant and nuclear weapons specialist and was stationed at RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge in England from July 1977 to July 1980. He departed the Twin Base complex 5 months before the now famous Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident occurred. He was then stationed at Griffiths Air Force Base in Rome, New York, a few hours from where I am, with the 416th Heavy Bombardment Group of the Strategic Air Command. Following his military service, he moved to California, attended Moore Park College, and graduated with a degree in exotic animal training and management. Then worked in movies and television as a wild animal trainer in Hollywood. In 1987, he moved to San Diego and became an elephant trainer at the San Diego Wild Animal Park, since renamed the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, and by far the most distinguished, prestigious, highly regarded zoo in America. When he left in 1999, he changed careers and became a corrections officer at the Roswell Correctional Center outside of Roswell, New Mexico. He left the state prison system in 2012 and went to work as a security contractor for the United States Department of Homeland Security at Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in nearby Artesia, New Mexico. He has worked there for the past 10 years. It was while working at the RCC at the corrections as a corrections officer that he had one of the most memorable UFO sighting events that I have ever heard of. And I'll say here parenthetically, I've been doing this work for more than 40 years. I don't know how many hundreds of people have shared their stories with me, but Pat's is indelible and certainly one I will never forget, because ultimately it drew me in a very personal way. Patrick Colligan, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi, Peter. Glad to be with you.
It's great to have you here, my friend. You were not aware of it, but I have wanted to have you on the show as a guest since the very first episode. One of the things that I'm always interested in is how people became the people that they are, the turns that life takes, the influences upon us that make us, again, the adults we become. And in your case, you know, we've shared a lot of stories over the years. You and your wife have been incredibly kind and gracious to me as hosts on a number of visits to Roswell. And I want to start by asking you a little about your family. You were born in Buffalo, and I know you have a sister. Are there any other siblings?
I have a brother and a sister. I'm the oldest of three.
Very good. And growing up, was your mom a working mom or a mom, stay at home and take care of the kids mom?
My mother always worked. She was a registered nurse, and she worked the night shift at Millard Fillmore Hospital in Buffalo.
Oh, boy. While I ask this next question, I'm going to leave the mic and turn on my backlight. Would you tell us about when you mastered the craft of reading and the kind of books you were drawn to?
Well, I suppose one of the earliest books that I read was Babes in Toyland, and I liked that as a very young child. And I would have the book read to me over and over again, and then I could turn the pages of the book and tell the story verbatim as though I knew how to read. But I was actually 3 years old and I hadn't learned to read yet.
I'm laughing in part because my grandniece is doing the exact same thing now. And following shortly, I'm sure, will be my younger grandniece. I remember as a little boy, I never read the book, but my grandfather introducing me to the story in the wonderful early 1930s Laurel and Hardy version. Did you ever see that child's film?
No, I don't think I have seen.
Well, there's some homework for you to bring back old times. Once you had mastered the adult world of reading, what kind of books were you drawn to?
I think mainly, well, I'll tell you a book that was influential on me. When I was 10 years old, I read Chariots of the Gods.
Well, that's precocious. Yeah, I'd say that was influential on you.
Yeah, and that sparked a lifelong interest in the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial visits.
Which we share a profound interest in. When you started to be introduced to the world of movies, was it on TV or going to the movie theater with your family or with your friends? How did that begin?
Well, some of the early movies that I went to with my family was to the drive-in, and I
Cool.
remember seeing The Dirty Dozen at the drive-in, and also Planet of the Apes.
Not bad. Um, did Well, we've talked about your dad, and I've been mesmerized by some of your stories. He was not like my dad or a lot of dads that I knew. Can you tell us something about your dad and share some thoughts about him?
Well, my dad was a highly intelligent person. Um, I think that he had attention deficit disorder. Um, he he was sort of a high achieving individual, but he was hampered by the fact that he had alcoholism, and his relationship with drinking kind of self-sabotaged him time and time again.
Yeah. Can you tell us, or would you like to, and not completely your call, about how he earned his living?
Um, he was an entrepreneur. He had different businesses. He ran a gas station at the what's called the Four Corners in Orchard Park, which is a suburb of Buffalo. We lived in Orchard
Yep.
Park, 10 miles outside of Buffalo. And he had a service station there at the Four Corners, which is the dead center of town.
Hmm.
He was sort of a P.T. Barnum type character. He promoted his gas station by having an event where he had a guy saw a car in half. and that's one of my earliest memories.
Nobody in the world that I know or will know has that as an early childhood memory. You got that locked down, Pat. Holy moly. I wonder if that would help us now save on the cost of fuel. I guess it would, because you couldn't use your car after that.
Yeah.
Jesus. At a certain point growing up, maybe you realize that, nice as that part of upstate New York is, it's a little cold in the winter, and maybe you didn't want to spend the rest of your life there. Was that something that came up in childhood or when you were older?
Um, well, growing up, that was all I knew.
Sure.
And so winters in Buffalo are basically 6 months long. and so you get used to that. And with heavy snowfall, I think the snowfall there is about 90 inches per year on average. So we measure snow by the foot in Buffalo, not by the inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went through a number of blizzards in my childhood. And when I was 12 years old, I had a morning paper route. I delivered for the now defunct Buffalo, the Courier Express in Buffalo, which was the
Yeah.
morning paper. And the Buffalo Evening News was the evening paper, which has since been renamed the Buffalo News. And the Courier Express went out of business a couple of decades ago. But I delivered early morning in the dark in outside of Buffalo, New York. I delivered papers where I had to go through 3-foot snowdrifts to get to the houses to put the paper in the door. And so all of these all of these stories that people tell about traipsing to school in the snow and all that, mine are real.
I had a paper route too, but I got to be on my bicycle and hit the porch whenever possible. You would have had to have had a very special bicycle, um, basically a tank with treads and a heater inside.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a little different environment. Yeah.
what kind of movies did you favor growing up?
Oh, I think the first movie was Billy Jack, and I liked all the martial arts stuff in the movie, and him being the unlikely hero and the defender of the downtrodden.
Yep.
Yeah, that movie had an impact on me as a child.
At a certain point, you're in high school. Um, did you have a UFO sighting as a young person, or was it just an intellectual interest from having read Chariots of the Gods at 10 years old?
Yeah, just an intellectual interest. I didn't have any UFO incidents growing up. Just a curiosity in the subject. I think just a pretty average curiosity, nothing outstanding.
Yeah. Any other interest when you were growing up into any kind of sport or, other thing that kids are into?
I studied martial arts. I studied an Okinawan style called Judo-Ryu with the world master who had trained in Japan and had lived in Japan and trained under his master and had become the successor. Was very, very hard, very disciplined. We had 3-hour sessions, and we even dispensed with belts. There were no belts. We just did serious training and went to tournaments and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Pat, most of us, even if we don't have pets, we love animals or some kinds of animals. Many of us, we live with a certain level of hypocrisy in that we love certain animals and we eat other animals. That word love is very flexible there. What was it when you were young?
During my time in the Air Force,
Well, I guess what I'm getting at here is based on what we're about to go into in terms of
am I coming through?
Yeah.
Okay. So Mick Blackwell was the last guy that I studied under. He had won some kind of a competition in the UK of sort of like the something with the stars or something, the UK version. So that was his claim to fame. And he was another charismatic guy. So that's mainly my involvement with sports growing up.
Got it. You're coming through high school. For a lot of us, we're lucky enough to either have some help from or get a scholarship, and we go on to college from high school. You went into the Air Force. What was it that made you want to join up, and why the Air Force rather than another service branch?
Well, when I was in high school, all of the kids a couple years older than me, they were all being drafted and shipped off to Vietnam. And so I had pretty much reconciled myself to that was my future. That when I finished high school, I would go into the military and go to Vietnam. But when 2 months before my 17th birthday, Saigon fell to the communists, and we were out of the war. So by a twist of fate, I just narrowly missed being drafted and sent to Vietnam.
Yeah.
But I think I was already so established in my way of thinking that I was going to go into the military that I didn't let go of that.
Yeah.
I spoke with, we had a lot of veterans in our town. who were a few years older than me, and that went in various services. And I spoke with all of them. And I came to the conclusion that the Air Force was probably the best service for me to go into. And so I chose the Air Force. Now, a couple of months before I enlisted, I was involved in a very serious auto wreck.
Oh, no.
That kind of propelled me toward making a change. I was a passenger. There were 6 of us into this GTO 1970 red GTO convertible. And we were out driving in the country, and the driver was racing against another friend of ours in a Camaro.
Oh, Christ.
And the guy who was driving, he went into a wild turn and flipped the car. So we rolled over 1.5 times and went once end over end.
Oh my God!
And there were 6 of us in this GTO convertible, and it was a ragtop. Fortunately, the top was up, and none of us were wearing seatbelts.
Oh Christ!
And when the car subsided, when we went into that first roll, it was all just twisting metal and glass, and everything went into slow motion.
Of course.
And when we finally stopped rolling, we were upside down, and we were on the side of one end of the car was on the shoulder of the road, the other end of the car was on some people's front lawn, and the passenger compartment was suspended over a 4-foot deep ditch.
Oh my!
Back in those days, there were open ditches along the sides of the roadway.
Sure.
And that 4-foot ditch gave us the space to survive. Yeah. Yes. And the canvas top acted like a net catching us. So by just a twist of 1,000,000 to 1, we survived the wreck.
Everybody was okay?
One guy spent a couple of weeks in the hospital with various injuries, but I came out of it unscathed, without a scratch, just badly shaken up from being tossed around. When the car finally subsided, I was sitting in the back seat on the right-hand side, the passenger side, and there were 2 guys sitting next to me and 3 guys in the front. When that car wound up upside down, I was tossed back into the part where the back window was, and the seat had been thrown out. And so I couldn't see anyone else. I was separated from everyone else in the car. As far as I knew, and I was laying in the water in this ditch upside down. And my first thought was drowning. And my second thought was gas was pouring out of the gas tank. And my second thought was, oh no, we could go up in flames, and here I am. And I'm trapped. And so
you're 17 years old?
I was able to shake. Yes. And I was able to shake part of the roof and let people know where I was. And the driver was able to, there was a tear in the roof, and he was able to enlarge that tear, and I was able to crawl through.
Good Lord.
And get out. My first thought was that I was the only one who survived, that I was in just the right place, because I couldn't see anyone else.
Yeah.
So anyhow, after surviving that 1 in a million crash survival,
yes,
that sort of affected me to where I was motivated to make a major change. And 2 months later, I turned 18. And I went down a week after my 18th birthday, and I enlisted in the Air Force.
I can't imagine. Did you, this is the kind of crazy, reckless thing young guys do sometimes, whether or not you're driving. Did you have to interface with the police or your parents on this in terms of, you're an idiot and don't ever do that again?
Well, well, it was way out in the country. So there was a limited police force out there.
Yep.
And this was an area called the Boston Hills, which is south of Buffalo. We were about 20 miles south of the city of Buffalo in the Boston Hills. And so there's sort of like kind of a part-time cop came up on the scene, and he he said to the driver, he said, have you been drinking? And he said, no. And he said, well, you smell like it. And he said, so? And that was the end of it. No DWI charge, no DWI test, nothing. Because it was just like, it was Barney Fife and Andy Mayberry. So they called an ambulance, and the ambulance came and took the one guy away. And the people that from the house that we had crashed on their front lawn, they called the cops and the ambulance.
Sure. And
no one could believe, and we were standing around talking and so forth, and no one could believe that we had been in that car. So the driver was only charged, he got a ticket for a bald tire. And I think he got one for imprudent speed.
I guess.
And then we all had a meeting. We all had a meeting with his insurance agent, and we all covered for him, as boys that age are inclined to do. We concocted a story that a dog ran out in front of the car, and he swerved to miss the dog, and then rolled. And
if that insurance company or agent is listening right now, pay this no mind. Continue on, Pat.
and the family of the guy who was in the hospital, they didn't sue. It was a different time.
Yes.
There was no lawsuit filed, and no criminal charges brought or anything. So it all kind of papered over, for the guy driving.
So 2 weeks later, your life has changed radically. Where did you do your basic training?
Well, I went down and I signed up a week after my 18th birthday, and I had a guaranteed job. And I had scored very high in the ASVAB testing, and I selected nuclear weapons specialist because I thought, well, the Vietnam War was over. Well, at least maybe I can do my part in the Cold War. The Cold War is still going on.
You bet. So
I wanted to do something consequential. I wanted to be involved in what was actually happening.
Yeah.
So I signed up for the guaranteed position, and by doing that, I had to wait 6 more months for a spot in the school to open. So I was on the delayed enlistment program then from June, my birthday, until December 17th, when I reported for active duty.
And were you?
And during that time, I was working at a gas station pumping gas,
but not cutting cars in half.
No, I was actually working for a gas station that had been a competitor of my father's. Back,
Did he find any humor in that?
10, 15. No, the guy who owned it was an elderly gentleman. His name was Joe Bauer, and he was one of the wealthiest men in that part of New York. He was a multimillionaire, a Mason, and he owned not only that gas station, but he also owned a fleet of trucks that delivered gas, and he had sort of a kind of a Rockefeller corner on the gas market for the Buffalo area. And Joe was in his 90s when I went to work at the station, and he still came down and visited and spent time with us. And his nephew ran the station for him.
Wow! So December of that year rolls around, and you ship out. Where did you go to do your first part of basic training?
I I took a flight. It was my very first time on an airplane. I flew from Buffalo to San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Big
the bus
change.
picked us up there at the airport, and we rode into Lackland Air Force Base on a bus at night. And then there was the typical thing of everybody get off the bus and the drill sergeant yelling. And we had got our suitcases and we lined up, and they were like, set down your bags, pick up your bags, this and that. And just started the whole process that night.
At a certain point, you had to be singled out for specialty training relative to working around nuclear ordnance. What was that like?
Well, I spent 2 months in Texas in basic training. And then after that, I was assigned to the technical training school for nuclear weapons specialist. And that was at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. So I went to Lowry for my tech school, and I was there for another 6 months in tech school.
Was there any time at tech school when, how can I say, the profound reality of the devices you'd be working with really registered? I mean, this is not just a weapon or a bomb or, you know, a piece of artillery. This is a nuclear bombs, nuclear ordnance you're going to be working around. Was it just sort of a gradual enculturation that, yeah, that's what I'm doing and I'll follow protocols? Or was there a moment when it kind of hit you?
Well, it's, you know, we all knew we were in something deep, something serious, and we took our training seriously. There was a point where during training we had modules, and we would work on different bombs that were in the Air Force inventory at that time. And we'd work on one module for a week or two, and then work on another, and we go from one system to another. And we were taking these, of course, we were working on training weapons. And that meant they were identical to the thing in the field, except they had no high explosive and they had no nuclear radioactive material in them. But in every other way, they were identical. And we would tear these weapons down, and there were points where we were like really into something sensitive and switching out some components or something. And the instructors at that point tipped over a garbage can and banged the lid and made a big old noise, like right while we're into something very sensitive, to see how everybody would react. And our class held together pretty well, and just continued on. And they'd had incidents where people just fell to the floor in a fetal position. And that's kind of how you washed out.
Yeah, that'd be me.
You know, so either, you know, you were being screened psychologically,
yes,
and academically.
Good. Yeah,
and for your suitability and progressing in the training, you know, and they were small classes. My class only had 7 airmen in my class.
Pat,
and we had a different instructor for each module. Got
it. You complete your training, and then you're all going to be sent to the bases where you're going to be serving. Did you have a base of choice or a country of choice, or they just said you're going to this base?
Well, when we got close to graduation, 5 of the 7 guys in my class got assignments, and they were all stateside.
Wow.
Mainly SAC bases. There was me and one other guy, me and Ricky Horman, who we did not get assignments yet. And our assignments came about a couple of weeks later, 2-3 weeks later, we got our assignments. And he got Germany and I got England.
Wow.
And Ricky Horman opted. We had an opportunity right before graduation to select if we wanted to go to the EOD school, which is Emergency Ordnance Disposal.
Oh boy.
That's the bomb squad for the Air Force, the bomb experts.
Right.
And we nuclear weapons specialists were 463s, and the EOD were 464s. So Ricky opted to go to the EOD school, which was nearly a 2-year school.
Wow.
Following the nuke school. And so he went to Maryland for the first part. I think the first part was in Maryland. Got a plum assignment here. I don't want to screw this up in any way, so I'm going to England.
So you are shipped to Suffolk. I'm guessing you landed at Lakenheath?
We landed at Mildenhall, and then we bussed about an hour drive from Mildenhall to Bentwaters.
Got it.
And when you came into Bentwaters in those days, when you came into Bentwaters in those days, you were greeted by Quonset huts. And we were told that was the senior NCO quarters. That's where the senior NCOs lived on base. They lived in Quonset huts. So everything was pretty primitive back in 1977.
I remember I first visited in 88, and the housing area was really quite advanced, and like a small subdivision in a suburb, rather antiseptic, but there it was. But I remember seeing some of the Quonset huts. What was it like adjusting to life on the base and life in England?
Well, my first year in England, I was in England for 3 years.
Yeah.
My first year in England, I lived on base. In the our barracks were set up by squadron, and I was in the munitions squadron, the explosive squadron, and so I lived in the munitions squadron barracks for my first year on base. And after 1 year of being in England, I had the opportunity to move off base. And so I found a place to live out in the country. And there was another guy in our squadron who had found a house out in the country. An English, this is just unbelievable that we found this place. It was an English manor house that was set on a section of land. In other words, it was surrounded by 640 acres, a mile square. And this house was the main house on this piece of property. It was called Red House Farm.
Yes.
And our driveway was over half a mile long. You drive up the driveway and you wouldn't see the house until you made the final turn in the driveway. And then there was Red House Farmhouse.
And how many guys lived there?
Well, this guy in our squadron who got the house, he had a family, wife and children, and he lived in the downstairs of the house. And me and another guy from the squadron lived in the upstairs of the house. So we had plenty of room, and it was real nice, an idyllic setting, something just like out of an English romance novel.
Yeah.
And unbelievable that a couple of enlisted guys from the munitions squadron scored such a house. And I spent my last 2 years in England living there in Red House Farm in a little farming community called Sternfield, which was outside of the town of Saxmundham.
Yep. And how long was the drive to work?
We were 10 miles from Bentwaters.
And so you had a vehicle?
Yes. First, I got a motorcycle. I got a Czechoslovakian-made bike called a Jawa, which the British model was the CZ, or as we Americans would say, the CZ. And it was, I can't remember the cc's on it, but it was something like about 160 cc's. It wasn't a big bike, and the gear shifter doubled as the kickstart. Very, very unusual bike, and I got a British provisional license to drive the motorcycle, and then got a full British license, and then got a third Air Force license. So my first year I rode the bike, and in the rain and everything, and there was a lot of days when it rained.
Oh, yeah.
So I did a lot of riding in the rain. And my last year in England, I bought a car from a guy who was shipping out in my shop. And that was a Plymouth Cricket, which was the American version identical to the Hillman Avenger. And so it was a good car to have because you could get all of the parts for it from Hillman Avenger parts. Yeah, so I had that for my last year in England.
So any incidents relative to your work in terms of nuclear ordnance that stick in your mind from that period that you were on the Twin Base complex?
No, nothing really. We were part of the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing.
Yep.
And the wing comprised the two bases, the twin bases.
Yep.
Kind of unique in the Air Force. That one wing was spread across two bases.
That I know.
And it was an assignment for the wing commander, where he came in as a bird colonel, and he either departed as a brigadier general, or he went to an office job in the Pentagon in retirement. And both of my wing commanders got their stars. So,
right. I wanted to ask you if you knew or remembered former Deputy Base Commander Charles I. Halt.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I knew Halt. Of course, he was the Deputy Base Commander, so he was a figure that everybody knew.
You bet.
Yeah, so I remember Colonel Halt, Colonel Williams, who was the Vice Wing Commander under Colonel Rudolph Wacker, who was my first wing commander. He was a West Point man. Back in the days when those guys were coming up, the Air Force Academy hadn't even been created yet. So all of the Air Force people went to West Point and then were commissioned.
Pat? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Continue.
So Vice Wing Commander Gordon Williams was promoted to Wing Commander, and Rudolph Wacker got his star, and he went to head up a 6th Air Division which was partially in Arkansas, and it was a Titan missile wing. And he was there when they had an incident where a reentry vehicle on top of a Titan missile catapulted out of the silo and landed in a farmer's field.
Oh, gosh.
live with nuclear warheads. That ended Wacker's career. He was done there at 1 star. Williams was the wing commander at the time of the Bentwaters incident.
Yep, 5 months after you left.
Yes, and he became wing commander while I was still there. Williams went on to, I know, at least 2 stars in his career.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to ask you to hold it there for a moment, in that obviously for you and I, we're talking about information and personalities that I'm aware of from my 9 years work on Left at East Gate, book really in a way that brought us together. And with just a minute and a half left at the top of the hour here, you leave the Air Force with a fully honorable discharge after 3 years, and
Oh,
you rotated back
4
to
years.
the States, right? You rotated back to the States and spend your last year at Griffiths in Rome, New York.
Yes,
Is that correct?
I spent my last 6 months in the Air Force at Griffiths in SAC.
Okay. When we come back, I'm going to make us move at a more lively pace. I took more time than I intended talking about my dear friend who passed this morning, but we have an amazing second half of this show coming at us. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and my very special guest tonight is my friend Pat Colligan.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
And we are back. Meanwhile, here on Earth, your host, Peter Robbins, my guest, Pat Colligan. Pat, you leave the Air Force after 4 years with an honorable discharge, and you decide to make a career move, very unusual for somebody without a background in, well, animal husbandry, being a graduate of Cornell Veterinary School. You wanted to work with large animals. What was it that made you want to take that extraordinary career decision?
Well, during my last year in England, I talked with people who lived from all over the United States, and people who came from all different states.
You bet.
And I asked them to tell me about their states and what it was like living there and everything. And the most positive experiences that I got was from people from California. thinking that their state was the best. So I decided during my last year in England that when I got out of the Air Force, I could go live anywhere I wanted to, and that I would go and live in California. So after I got out of the Air Force, I took a road trip and drove to California and started my life there.
Yeah. But what was it that drew you to what most people would consider a really extraordinarily exotic career?
Well, I was working. I got a job in downtown Sacramento, working at a convenience store at night. Okay. Now this was in the peak of the recession. It was Ronald Reagan had just been sworn in as president, and it was the first year of his presidency, and we were in a steep recession. In Buffalo, it was 25% unemployment rate.
Gosh.
Great Depression level unemployment in Buffalo.
Yeah.
In California, it was only 10%, which by today's standards, very high, but it was much better than Buffalo. Buffalo, you absolutely could not find a job. And in California, you could find a job, but you had to take whatever you could get.
Sure.
So I wound up working in a convenience store in downtown Sacramento, and I progressed up to a store manager, and I was thinking about making a change, and we had 2 armed robberies at the store that I managed, and that was finally just it for me. So I decided to quit that and go get a part-time job and go back to college. So I started attending American River College in Sacramento, and I got a job at a place called Western Feed and Ranchers Supply. And we had all kinds of animals there that you raised. But stepping this back a little bit, when I was thinking of making the transition, there was an ad in the Sacramento Bee newspaper for an elephant keeper at the Sacramento Zoo.
Wow.
And I looked at the qualifications, the minimum qualifications to apply. And I thought, well, wow, that would be a great job to have. And I read the qualifications. I didn't even meet the minimum qualifications to apply for the job.
Yep.
But I thought to myself, okay, I can go about getting those qualifications and then, apply for a future position. Yes. So that's part of why I made the transition and went back to school and went to work part-time at the Western Feed and Ranchers Supply. We had chickens and ducks and guinea fowl and hamsters and small animals, small pet animals and things like that. So I got some experience raising that stuff and did a lot of working in the warehouse, carrying out feed sacks to customers. And then started taking college classes at American River College. Well, I knew that the animal field I wanted to go in, you really had to have a master's degree to do anything, to really be employable. And then I knew I needed a bridge to that, some type of occupation. So I was looking at animal health technician. There was a 2-year program to get certified as an animal health technician, and you work for a veterinary practice. And I was looking at that, and then a counselor there told me about this program in Southern California that was a 2-year program, and you got a degree in exotic animal training and management. And they had a zoo at the college where you got 2 years hands-on experience working with exotic animals. And I thought, wow, now that's something. So I applied for that program in Southern California, got accepted, and then I moved from Sacramento down to Moore Park, California.
So you graduate this program. Was it then that you began to work with exotic animals in television and film?
Yes. I graduated from the program at Moore Park and had 2 years under my belt as an apprentice zookeeper at that point. And I got hired by a company that trained wild animals for movies and television.
Yeah.
And so I went to work there, and that working for that company enabled me to raise and train Michael Jackson's pet chimp Bubbles.
I was going to say, when you first told me about that, and this, of course, is way back in the day, before Michael had any, tinge of scandal attached to his name. He was a brilliant pop star. And we learned that, he decided that he wanted a chimpanzee, but he had no working knowledge of how to take care of it. You developed a relationship with Michael as well as training the chimpanzee and taking care of it. How did that work?
Well, when Michael decided he wanted to get a chimp, he contacted my boss, who was Bob Dunn, and Bob Dunn was like the preeminent chimp expert in the United States. And Bob had more chimps than any other private owner in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh my gosh.
So Bob gave Michael a book to look through for chimps that were available. And he picked out Bubbles as being the most photogenic. And so we obtained Bubbles from an animal dealer in Austin, Texas. And in fact, Bubbles' first name was Austin because he came from Austin, Texas. And we mainly referred to him as the baby. So because he was the youngest chimp at that time, we called him Baby. But Michael gave him the stage name of Bubbles.
Right.
So he became known to the world as Bubbles. Bubbles lived with us. I took care of him, raised him, trained him. And then at that time, Michael didn't have Neverland Ranch yet. He was still living at home with his parents in Encino. And they had a family compound there in Encino. And so Joe Jackson was not going to let Michael have a chimpanzee at the house. So Bubbles lived with us. And on an occasional basis, Michael his representatives would call up and make arrangements to have Bubbles brought over for like a weekend or for a slumber party or something of that nature. And so
you had to be part of that?
Yeah, I'd bring Bubbles over. And at that point, Bubbles was young enough that we could drop him off and leave him with Michael. And Michael could manage him and handle him for a couple of days. And then they would call us and have us come and pick him back up and bring him back home.
Right.
But that's kind of how it went. Bubbles was there on kind of a part-time basis with Michael.
And at a certain point, you made a transition to work at the most prestigious zoo in America with large animals. Did it begin with big cats, or did you go right on to work with elephants?
Well, I made the move from Los Angeles to San Diego, and went to work at the San Diego Wild Animal Park. And I got a job there training elephants. And it was a good program. They had 2 elephant herds. There was an Asian herd and an African herd, basically 10 each. We had an African bull and an Asian bull for breeding. And it was a great, just a choice job within the zoo field, just a choice facility to work at. And the Wild Animal Park, I focused on it rather than the zoo. They're sister facilities. all but run by the same company.
Sure.
And the Wild Animal Park is 30 miles north of the zoo. The zoo is a world-class zoo on its own, but
Yes.
with the addition of the Wild Animal Park, it just puts it over the top to being the top place in the world. And everything at the park, the Wild Animal Park, was on a grander scale. For instance, the zoo had 5 elephants, and the Wild Animal Park had 20.
Gosh. And you worked with the herd at the park?
Yes, with both the Asian herd and the African herd.
Amazing. Was it necessary to keep those herds separate?
Yes, it was 2 separate gene pools. 2 separate groups, social groups. The 2 yards were side by side, and a monorail track ran down between the 2 yards where people could come on the monorail and view both the Asian and African elephants. And I also took elephants from the Asian yard, took them out to the elephant ride area and gave rides to the public, and also performed in the elephant show arena with elephants. And so, it was a good all-around experience, getting to work with a number of elephants, both types of elephants, and, also in just a world-class facility. So it was a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful experience for me.
I have to tell you, this has got to be my all-time favorite photo of the young Pat.
That's me with an African elephant named Shoppy. And Shoppy was the tallest of the African females, and the top of my head just comes to about the bottom of her ear.
Yeah. Most of us know, I don't know anybody that isn't awed by elephants, by their majestic presence, by their incredible sensitivity and intelligence, by their very sophisticated socializing and family groups. And of course, they've been all but wiped off the earth. It's beyond tragic. But at the same time, even when they are socialized, they are not domesticated. These are wild animals, and there is always a danger. After many years of working with elephants, the event that you shared with me that caused you to move on to your next career was, for me, and much more for you, shattering, heartbreaking, tragic, and absolutely, I don't know anybody that ever had anything like that happen to them. Will you share that event with our listeners and viewers?
Okay, well, there were 2 major events while I worked with the elephants, and they both involved the Asian herd. The first event was a co-worker of mine, Dave Saomarcos, Saomarcos, Dave Saomarcos. He was a young 20-year-old who started working with us at the elephants, and about 10 months in, when he was 21 years old, he had a serious elephant attack. And that is up on YouTube. You can go to that elephant attack by Cindy the Elephant on Dave Saomarcos, and an extremely violent attack on Dave. Now, that happened when I had been with the elephants for maybe 8 months. So that was early on in my career. Then and that attack happened January 31st, 1989. Then in mid-March of 1991, we had another incident where a fellow elephant trainer, Pamela Orsi, was killed by elephants in the Asian yard. She was in the yard working with an elephant named Carol. Carol was being very cooperative and was following her commands. But unbeknownst to Pam, 2 other elephants in the yard began to tussle and fight. And those were Alice and Cha-Cha. And they came into her area and pushed her up against Carol, sandwiched her between the 2 elephants. Oh, God. And she got the wind knocked out of her and fell to the ground. and then we believe it was Alice that trampled over Pam's head as
Good God.
Alice and Cha-Cha were tussling and moving on by.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't an intentional attack, it was incidental.
Yeah.
But Pam lost her life.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first people to respond on the scene.
Yeah.
And I've seen in news footage from local San Diego television. I'm standing next to her body and picking up her elephant hook. And I loaded her body onto a gurney, and then we took her out of the yard. And I inspected all of those elephants involved afterward, and had each of them lift up their feet and inspected them. There was no trace of blood or anything on any of the elephants.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there was no lingering, no intention. It was just a quick passing by event that occurred, and it was a closed casket.
Had to be. Was it that event that made you, and of course by this time you are married, and your wife decide perhaps it's time to do something else?
No, I'm pretty hard-headed. I'm kind of old school, suck it up and get back in there. I continued to work elephants for several years after that.
And I'm going to show a couple of quick pictures here.
Now, that photo you're showing right there was me with an olive baboon that I trained, and that's a live action shot during a show performance. And that particular photo was in the Sunday section of the Los Angeles Times newspaper. And that's a more relaxed pose with me with Rosie the baboon. And I trained monkeys and baboons prior to working with chimps with Bob Dunn.
Got it.
That's me with Nita in the elephant show arena doing an elephant show.
Well, at a certain point, and I'm realizing now we've got time, but we're going to have to move at a lively pace. You and your wife decide time to move and do something else. And you decided to settle in a small city in New Mexico, known for one subject around the world. What drew you to Roswell, New Mexico?
Well,
besides your interest in UFOs.
my wife and I were ready to get out of Southern California. And things had just changed a lot over the time. I lived in California for 17 years. Things changed a lot over that time period. Just the uncontrolled population growth had affected everything, and quality of life was going down. And we decided we had begun vacationing in the Southwest, and we're just ready to make it a more permanent situation. And so we took a trip over to New Mexico with the idea of checking out various locations for possibly living. And Roswell was the place that rung the bell for us. And so I resigned from the zoo, and we moved to Roswell. And I got within about, I think 2 weeks of moving, I was at the State Corrections Academy in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And I was a cadet in the academy about 2 weeks after moving to New Mexico. So I knew that if we moved to Roswell, I'd be changing career fields. So I was prepared for that. And I really had no interest after working at a place like San Diego Wild Animal Park, which has been renamed the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. After working at a facility of that caliber, I didn't have a lot of interest in, working at the Roswell City Zoo, which, I mean, it's a fine city zoo, but
it is.
Everything is on a much smaller scale.
Yeah, exactly.
So I knew that moving to Roswell, I would need to make a career change, and corrections seemed, I thought, well, gosh, what does being a wild animal trainer translate into? And I thought, well, if I could train wild animals, maybe I could work with the most dangerous animals of all, humans.
And you did.
In a prison setting. And
Yes.
so I made the career change, and then I had a career as a state corrections officer.
Yeah. Which meant, in common parlance, you were a prison guard. You were in that setting, in that environment, interfacing with people who had committed low-level and heinous capital crimes.
Yes.
This brings us to a point where I'm going to tell people a little bit how we met. This goes back almost 15 years ago. I was just finishing up a stint in Roswell. At the time, I had one of the greatest jobs I've ever had, working for the city of Roswell, New Mexico, directly out of the mayor's office, overseeing a good part of the organization of their annual UFO conference. When at the time, of course, as you remember, there were 2 conferences every year. The city put on a big one. The museum put on a more modest one. I was with the city. We were bringing in 15, 20,000 people for the big 4th of July weekend. We had a $150,000 budget to work with. It was major. And of course, I worked out of New York, but I would go back to Roswell, of course, in July. And we had just finished. It was 4 days of hard work. It was that final night, and I'm sitting in my favorite restaurant in town, Pepper's, almost after hours, sitting in a corner, having a bit to eat. And I look up and I see a very pleasant face, very respectful in terms of, I know you're eating, and you introduced yourself, and I invited you to sit down, and there began our friendship. And that evening, you told me a story about your UFO sighting experience that ultimately changed my life. Would you share that story with our listeners and viewers, Pat?
Yes. I was working the night shift at the time, and I was on a post called Vehicle Patrol, in which I was armed with a 12-gauge shotgun and rode around in a vehicle on the prison's perimeter and was there to interdict any escape attempts.
And let me interject here for one moment to let people know the corrections facility is way out on the prairie. Is it 15 or 20 miles from Roswell itself?
It's a 25-mile drive.
Wow.
From the city of Roswell down to the prison. Got it. And
continue on.
As the crow flies, it would be about maybe 20 miles.
Okie doke.
It would be 20 miles from the Roswell Correctional Center to the old base.
Got it.
The old RAAF at Roswell.
Which is right on the edge of town. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on a vehicle patrol, and I had a car come up near the prison gate, and I greeted them, and they were there to pick up a parolee who was paroling at midnight. And this was about 11 o'clock in the evening when I greeted this car. I had them pull across the cattle guard that was near the prison entrance and park over on one of the old runways from the back in the Army Air Corps days.
Yes.
So they positioned their car there, and I told them I would come and get them when it was time for the parolee to be released, who was their son. It was an elderly couple, and their other son was driving.
Right.
So 3 of them in the vehicle. So after I had them park, I drove back to an isolated area behind the prison chapel area, where I could observe the prison's perimeter fence, and I could also observe their car at the same time. After I have a car park or follow directions, I like to monitor them for a little bit to see that nothing, funny's going on.
Sure.
So that's why I was parked at this spot behind the prison chapel. And at about 11:15 p.m., an event started happening in the sky. There was a popping sound, kind of like a pop, 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 and an electrical crackling. And these white triangular shaped objects appeared one after another, and they were moving from my right to my left. And I'm watching this, and I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it. And I'm thinking, no, well, this isn't an asteroid. It's not a meteor. It's not an aircraft. What am I seeing here? And the lights moved from my right to my left, and then they went into a circular pattern where they started rotating around and coming back towards me. And then they moved again from my left to my right this time, moving again past my field of vision. And at this time, the entire craft came into view, and it was a giant UFO.
Describe it.
It was a dull gray in color. The white triangles were windows that were midway on the craft, and they wrapped around the craft. And they had ship structure between each window. The craft had kind of it was a saucer-shaped craft, and it had a dome on the bottom and a dome on the top, and these windows midway. And it was now passing from my left to my right, past my field of vision for the second time. And as it did this, it began to cloak. And it was on a glide path from, now this UFO appeared, a couple of 100 yards away from where I was positioned in my truck. And
about how big would you say it was?
I'm estimating 650 feet across.
Yeah.
It was a large craft. Or maybe that would make it a medium-sized craft. I don't know. It was on a glide path from my area towards the old base and the town of Roswell. You could see the lights from the old base and the lights from the town of Roswell on the horizon. Now, I mean, in that part of New Mexico, you can see forever. So I was looking at those lights 20 miles away. Yeah. And this ship was on a glide path towards them when it began to cloak. And it cloaked out. And when it did that, the only thing that remained visible was there was white light from the inside of the craft emanating out through those windows. And that was still visible at that point. And then the lights dimmed to half intensity, and then they went out completely. And at that point, the craft was completely invisible. And I sat there for a couple of minutes watching to see if anything else occurred. I didn't want to miss it. And that was the end of it. Nothing else happened. And I drove from there, that position behind the chapel, I drove from there over to the side of our master control center, and I parked in a well-lit area there. And I grabbed a blank log sheet, and then I wrote down what I had just experienced, and I drew a little picture and a detailed explanation of what I had just seen while it was fresh in my mind. I felt compelled to do that.
Yep.
And then I kept that log sheet for myself. Then I drove over back to where I'd had those people park.
Yes.
And I was interested if they had seen it too. So as I pulled up to their car, the man behind the wheel, who was the son, rolled down his window. He had been asleep across the wheel. And when I pulled up alongside him, his parents nudged him and woke him up, and he rolled down the window. And I said, did you see any? I didn't want to lead them in my questioning. I said, did you see anything unusual? And he said, no. He said, I've been sleeping. And then his father was sitting next to him in the passenger seat. And I looked at him and I said, sir, did you witness anything unusual? And the man was staring at me with just wide eyes, almost like that cult leader from the Heaven's Gate cult.
Oh, Marshall Applewhite.
Yes, he had the Marshall Applewhite look on his face, wide eyes, and he was moving his mouth, attempting to speak, but he was incapable of speech.
Wow.
And at that point, the wife was in the back seat. She leaned up over the front seat and she said, "Well, yes, I saw it. It was a giant flying saucer, and it went right from over there and it flew right into that building." And she pointed to the prison chapel. And she said, "Why was there no explosion? Why was there no fire? It crashed right into that building." And I realized afterward that they had seen the saucer from the point it was doing the rotation, and then coming back in my direction, and it had flown behind the prison chapel, but from their perspective it flew into the prison chapel because the cloaking occurred and it never came out the other side.
Yes.
So from what they were experiencing, they thought it had crashed into the building. So anyhow, I mean, that was, at that point, at least I had some validation. Someone else had seen it too. And you know, that was reassuring, you know.
Then you go back into the prison facility and you need some more validation. There was another brother officer who became a good friend of yours, who I met, and we've spent time together. Let's talk about you interfacing with him and maybe some of the inmates on this issue.
Okay. Well, I wanted to see if this thing was going to get out of control or whether I still had control of the story, you know?
Yes.
When the couple was getting their son from the Master Control Center, the parolee, they were speaking in Spanish. And I was standing by the door monitoring. They were speaking in Spanish. And then you would just hear them. They didn't say UFO in Spanish. They said it in English. They would just occasionally say UFO. So they were telling their parolee son about what they had just experienced. The mother was. And I looked to the guy working the master control post. He was Anglo. He didn't understand Spanish. He didn't know what they were saying. So he was clueless. So I thought, oh, good. Okay. So after they got out and they were then walking to the car to leave, I spoke with the parolee and I said, your mother's telling the absolute truth. I saw it too. And yes, a UFO did appear and we did see it. It actually happened.
Yeah.
And he was receptive. The parolee was receptive to that. Then a little bit afterward, I spoke with a fellow officer who was a close friend, and I got him in my vehicle and drove him out to where I was parked and described to him what I had seen. And he was the only one that I told that night.
Right. So,
and actually for a long time after the incident, I had only discussed it with that one officer, and my wife.
Yes.
Were the only two people I had talked to about it until years afterward.
So here we are at our very first meeting. It's quite late at night, and I am quite mesmerized by the account you are giving me. I had been tired, but all of a sudden I was incredibly curious. And I don't remember, I think you asked me if I was interested in going out there. And I said yes, and out we went. And you drove me to this facility, and we walked out onto the prairie, and you recreated the whole event as it would have happened that night.
And
with the stars overhead.
And this first visit that you made to the prison, it was in the afternoon. It was daylight.
Yeah, that's right.
And
then we went back at night.
A subsequent time when you came to Roswell, was a couple of years later, we decided to drive out there at night. And in fact, we went at the exact time that the incident had occurred, same time of night. So
I'm trying to
everybody,
remember though. Did we go there at night only once, or did we go twice?
I think once. I think
Okay.
I took you there twice, once in the daytime and then again at night.
Because it was a year or so later, we go out there at night. And again, it is dark, had a full day. And once again, you create this event
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And
Yes, you and I parked our vehicle on the old runway where the people's car had parked. Just off the prison grounds across the cattle guard. We started our discussion then of what I had seen. I pointed to you where I was parked behind the prison chapel, and we discussed it. Then we drove down the runway until it became a dirt road. We got out again and we discussed the incident some more, standing outside the car, discussing amongst ourselves. Then we got back in the car and we drove the dirt road back to the back road, which is the old YO Crossings Road. And that runs behind the prison. And then we started down the old YO Crossings Road. And we got right behind the prison, right behind where the sighting had occurred. And there was a ranch entrance there.
that's right.
And there was some metal art marking that turnoff for the ranch. And it was
Sure.
the Cheshire Ranch.
Which is a huge ranch, of course.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Massive. It was like, from that point, it was, I can't remember whether there's 8 or 16 miles down that road to get to the ranch headquarters. It was enormous ranch.
Some wonderful pictures of that. Yeah.
And you and I
I'm going to jump in right here for a moment before you say what you're going to say, and say my memory at that point is all of a sudden, I'm not just feeling tired, but profoundly tired. It just came on me out of nowhere in that way that, I'm driving with a friend. It's night. You're talking. And I realize I'm in that embarrassing moment of, I feel like I'm nodding out a bit, but I'm hearing you and I want to respond. And I think I'm talking to you and, I'm saying this and that. And then the next thing I know, we hit a small speed bump and we are just coming into downtown Roswell. And I snap to, and then once again, that thing of, maybe I fell asleep on him, and I just launch into conversation. You get quite quiet. And it's not till the night before I leave that you and Christy take me out to the beautiful Indian casino, which is, what's the name of it again, Pat?
It's the Inn of the Mountain Gods. And it's located on the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Yeah, it's just incredible. Those are wonderful photos you're showing. It's a 4-diamond resort on an Indian reservation, and just incredible.
Yeah, the grounds are, they're jaw-dropping, and this is one of those places where you say, good. There's a little bit of karma and justice in terms of the Indians' history with white people, and here is this gorgeous resort, which everywhere you look, it's really quite spectacular. And the restaurant there is like 4 stars. I like to think I'm fairly sophisticated in my travels and I'm a bit of a foodie. That was a wonderful meal. We ate, we had drinks, and then of course you had shared what you're about to tell everybody with Christy. And in the most gentle way possible, you brought us back to that moment, that evening, when I started to nod out and then kind of woke up again as we come into town and said, whatever you remember, this is what happened. Will you pick it up from there, Pat?
Yes. Well, you and I were standing at that ranch entrance to the Cheshire Ranch and admiring the metal art.
Yes.
And I made a remark to you that the UFO was similar to the Cheshire Cat in that the windows on the side of the craft were like the teeth, the smile of the Cheshire Cat.
Yes.
And when the Cheshire Cat disappeared, the last thing visible was its smile.
Yes.
And then we had a good laugh over that. The fact that this was the Cheshire Ranch and it was right at the location, and we had a good laugh. It was a
Yes,
lively kind of a thing. And
Yep.
then we hopped back into my car with me driving, you in the passenger seat, and we headed up the old Wyo Crossings Road. Now, this road goes from behind the Roswell Correctional Center. It goes from there all the way up to the back gate of the Roswell Army Airfield, the old Army Air Corps base. And from where we were parked there by the Cheshire Ranch and started to drive, you could see the lights of the RCC prison off to our right. And at that point, the prison's about maybe 3 miles away, thereabouts. And you could see the lights. Okay, so you and I are having a conversation in the car. I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, I realize that you're no longer conversing with me. You had stiffened up with your back straight and pushed back in the seat, and you were mumbling incoherently. And I thought, well, this is odd. I'm wondering if you're having a medical event, a seizure or something of that nature. So, but I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm driving in the direction of town. I'm going toward the hospitals. There's not much else I can do here, but just continue to drive and see what happens. So we get up about 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, we get up to the back of the base.
Yes.
And the lights are on the horizon of the base. And you snap out of it, you come to. And you make a remark about the prison lights. And I realize that for you, that last 15, 20 minutes is missing time.
Yes.
And you're disoriented. You don't realize that we've traveled this distance.
Not at all.
And so I just kind of make a joke of it, laugh it off. And
you dropped me off at the home of the people I was staying with.
Yes, and I dropped you off. And then it was the next day or two, we went up to the Inn of the Mountain Gods, and we had drinks and dinner. And I said to you, Peter, I said, do you know what happened the other night? And you were pretty much oblivious to it. You knew something had taken place, but you didn't know quite what. Yeah. And I explained to you what I just expressed. And, I asked if you had similar incidents, there was any kind of a medical type of a situation. And you said, no, that never occurred before. And I guess it hasn't occurred since. No. And it was not medical related. No. So that's just a weird twist, to this whole thing.
Yeah, I know myself well enough to know that I have never had an event like that happen before or since, as well as we can know these things. And I thought you handled it after the fact in just the right way, because that time was completely gone for me, but not in the traditional UFO missing time sense where you're gone. I was there, but it wasn't, whatever was going on with me was not under my direction, under my control.
Yes, and I realized later that what I was witnessing with you was very similar to what I witnessed with the passenger in the car that night, the father of the parolee, when he was in that hypnotic trance and unable to speak. And I realized that they were very similar incidents.
To this day, Pat, I don't know what to make of it. And if anything, and I would have never known it, if you had not taken the time to lay it out for me. I do remember I've been to a lot of locations where people have had sightings or events over the decades in doing my research investigations, but I have never felt as deeply involved at any location I've ever visited in my life where somebody is relating. This was a sighting of such an extraordinary, I mean, your detail, and I know you well enough to know you're a man of character and you spin nothing. You have been involved in a lot of high security work over the years that you have worked as a contractor for the Department of Homeland Security, which is why we're not showing your contemporary face as opposed to your elephant keeper face. And, you know, I have tremendous respect and admiration for you. But this was something that made me feel, how can I say, I like to think of myself as a compassionate person and somebody who is a very good listener and who takes pride in having worked with, been befriended by so many people who have had extraordinary experiences. And mine is, you know, a drop in the bucket compared to, you know, an abduction experience or something. But for me, again, that location,
Yeah, there's a feeling there. There's a presence there. You know, I mean, it's hard to describe.
am I
But we
correct in
experienced it.
am I correct in remembering in your original description of this craft, which when you gave me the size, you know, I think of like Stevensville, Texas, where it was described as big as, you know, a aircraft carrier. This was not that, but it was massive,
Yeah,
and it was thicker, you know, more like a hamburger
and
shape
and
than a disc.
yeah, and you mentioned the word aircraft carrier. Something I left out when I just told you the story was that when that ship was appearing, I reached for my shotgun, which was next to me, and placed my hand on the shotgun. And at that point, a telepathic message came to me of aircraft carrier. Just a simple phrase, aircraft carrier. And I thought, my God. And then that was followed up by we are 1,000 years advanced beyond your technology. So what I realized it was a telepathic communication from the occupants of that craft to diffuse any aggression on my part. And it
I
worked.
was going to say, shotgun, good with a individual with bad intentions. Against that,
No.
I don't
Yeah.
think so.
No, that's a mismatch. Yeah.
A mismatch indeed. Do I remember correctly that it had 2 rows of windows or one?
One row. They were enormous panel windows that were rectangular in shape, and they were, say, horizontal. You know, with ship structure between them.
At any point, was it close enough for you to make out movement in the window areas?
No. I just saw the white light emanating out of the windows, and I did not see any occupants.
Wow. Well, in the time we have left, we have had some grand adventures together, Pat. You are so knowledgeable about the part of the country that you have made your home. And in terms of the history of the Old West, on one of my visits, along with dear Jennifer Stein, the executive producer and director of the terrific Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton documentary, and my dear friend Georgie Sirota, you took us on a tour of an area that's most famous for some of Billy the Kid's most colorful behavior. And
exploits.
Exploits for sure. And you recreated it for us in remarkable ways. Also, I remember, these are the signs as you are closing in on the facility where you work. And obviously, we have a very dangerous character here who luckily we did not pick up. Who knows what would have happened if we had. But to a different point, this has got to be, it's more than 10 years ago. I think it was 2010. You tell me the story of a ex-military officer that you know who has become the world's ranking expert on Atlas silos, early 60s nuclear missiles. And that he knew because all of the analog nomenclature, all of the manuals and things had disappeared out of the Pentagon. He became the de facto expert, that he had bought and sold silos, and he was restoring one outside of Roswell to be what it was like when it opened. And was I interested in going? Well, we went along with your dear friend that you had served at the Correctional Institute with. We spent 4 hours underground, and I very quickly, because it's a matter of minutes till we end here, the very mundane looking entrance out there in the middle of nowhere, and we start to descend, and we get to the blast door, which either weighed 2 or 3 tons, made to resist a nuclear blast in the vicinity. Get a sense of it's like a mega safe door, to put it mildly. Then we go through this gantry-way. We have a plaque here for the 579th Strategic Missile Squadron, which was the one that was active at the time. And this was one of the old photos that I copied off the wall of an Atlas. And then we go into the area, the pit, 120 feet deep, where an Atlas missile would have been. And to say it was evocative, to think of all of the power, the destructive power that was now this just large, empty space. And then to look up and see the blast doors was something I'll never forget. And when we came out, here we are. When we came out, this is one of the outside blast doors. The weather had changed so much, I felt like we had been down there for a week. It was an amazing experience, Pat. I only regret that I am not going to be able to join you in July for the long 4th of July weekend for one of our favorite events, the amazing Roswell UFO Conference and Festival, that this year will be extra special because we're coming into the 75th anniversary of Roswell, Kenneth Arnold, and our modern age of UFO sightings.
Yes. Now this, the amazing thing about this particular silo, this Atlas missile silo, is that number one, it's in private hands.
Yeah.
And it's owned by a guy who is a major in the, I believe, the Air Force. He's a historian and just very extremely knowledgeable. And he had bought up several of these silos and bought and sold them. And then this particular one he kept, and it was in the best condition and the best preserved and the best restored of all of the silos. And the fact that Roswell was ringed, you go out and travel in different directions out of Roswell, you will find these Atlas missile silos now decommissioned. It shows you how important and pivotal Roswell was in the early days. These are the first generation ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, the first generation on planet Earth.
And believe it or not, with that, my dear friend Pat, we are going to have to tie it up. It has been a pleasure having you on the show. I hope at some point in the future we can pick up where we left off and bring you back on. This is Peter Robbins. My guest tonight has been Pat Colligan, and this is Meanwhile Here on Earth. Take care, stay safe, and be kind to each other.